Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Tian Yu. Coming up in this edition, Israeli and Palestinian officials say they're coming closer to a ceasefire deal, but crucial differences remain unresolved. The suspect accused of murdering UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson has pleaded not guilty to charges of terrorism and murder. The UK economy flatlined in the third quarter, with legal services firms and bars and restaurants recording a weaker than expected performance. We begin in the Middle East. Israeli and Palestinian officials say they're coming closer to a ceasefire deal, but crucial differences remain unresolved. Media from the two sides reported that efforts led by Qatari, Egyptian, and U.S. mediators have shown progress, though a breakthrough remains elusive. The three countries have mediated indirect talks in recent days. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
There is a progress, and negotiators say some 90% of the issues have been resolved, but the 10% remaining issues are difficult to resolve. They are about two different issues. First, the numbers and the identities of both the Israeli hostages that will be released and the Palestinian prisoners that will be released. Israel, of course, is demanding to have the highest possible number of Israeli living hostages. The number that has been circulating here that Israel is demanding is 34 living hostages. That would include all of the women, all of the children, all of the elderly, and all of the sick. And according to Palestinian sources, that number does not amount to 34. Therefore, Israel is also demanding to have living hostages from the next category, which is young men. It is unclear if Hamas will accept that. They could perhaps accept that if Israel adds a bigger number of Palestinian prisoners, and also their profile would be higher. What do we mean by a higher profile? As far as the Palestinians are concerned, those Palestinians that are sentenced to life in Israeli prisons that were in charge of violent acts which killed hundreds of Israelis, they are those that the Palestinians are demanding to free from Israeli jails. This is one issue. There's also the issue of whether they will go back to their homes in the West Bank or be deported to a third country. That's also something to be discussed. And the second issue is how big will the Israeli withdrawal be from the Gaza Strip. It's already understood that there will be some Israeli presence left in the Gaza Strip after the first stage of the ceasefire. How big that presence will be, that is one of the main sticking points which for the moment is preventing the signature on the deal.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has again launched a wave of attacks on the so-called safe zone of al-Mawasi in southern Gaza. Israel claims it was targeting Hamas fighters. The strike came as a UN official in charge of humanitarian affairs said Israeli authorities have consistently denied the UN access to deliver aid, and that the continued intense violence has left Gaza civilians nowhere safe to go. Rami Amagari has more from the Strip.
Latest strike that what the Israeli army said that it targeted Hamas militants, but 13 people, including children, have been killed in this particular strike on the Mawasi area south of the Gaza Strip, just close to the British hospital, the British field hospital over the Mawasi area in southern Gaza Strip. This is not the first time that the Israeli army targets tents sheltering people on the coastal road and the Mawasi area in the central Gaza Strip, in south of the Gaza Strip, and also in Nusayrat, in different parts of Gaza. When over the past period, the people are surprised with these strikes on sheltering tents that are designated as safe zones or humanitarian zones for those displaced in those areas. More about 1 million people over there. Actually, this is coming along with other strikes in different in other parts of the Gaza Strip, in Nusayrat refugee camp, where an Israeli army operation is continuing over there, and to the north of the Nusayrat refugee camp, there is reportedly about some kind of excavations by the Israeli army bulldozers and armored vehicles. Actually, 13 people were left killed during these the Israeli actions on the Nusayrat refugee camp. In the northern Gaza Strip, there was intensive Israeli action over the hospital, Kamal Udwan Hospital, ordering the hospital to leave immediately towards the Indonesian hospital. According to the chief of the hospital, the Israeli army ordered them to leave towards the Indonesian hospital, and the chief says that there are no ambulances to carry those patients and injured inside the hospital towards another destination. And by the way, according to health officials here in the territory, 14,500 Palestinian children have been reportedly killed since the eruption of the Israeli war against the Islamist Hamas party in Gaza in October of last year.
That was Rami Amagari reporting. Turning to North America, the suspect accused of murdering an American healthcare executive has pleaded not guilty to charges of terrorism and murder. Investigators say Luigi Mangione planned the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson earlier this month before shooting him outside a hotel in Manhattan. Mitch McCann has more from New York.
Luigi Mangione was led into a Manhattan courtroom wearing a maroon sweater and light-coloured trousers, with his wrists handcuffed and his ankles shackled. He pleaded not guilty to 11 charges, including first-degree murder, a terrorism-related offence, 2 variations of second-degree murder, and weapons charges. In addition to the state charges in New York, Mangione also faces federal charges, as well as further state charges in Pennsylvania. In court, the 26-year-old's lawyer spoke out against the treatment of her client, stating his rights are being violated. She added he's a young man and he is being treated like a human ping-pong ball, referring to the various state and federal charges he faces. Karen Friedman Agnifilo also criticised the so-called perp walk past TV cameras that Mangione was subject to when arriving in New York last week.
And they're literally treating him like he is like some sort of political fodder, like some sort of spectacle. He was on display for everyone to see in the biggest staged perp walk I've ever seen in my career. It was absolutely unnecessary.
Despite the serious nature of the charges, Mangione has gained a following online, with some even considering him a folk hero. 24 women were among the attendees filling the available seats in the courtroom on Monday. A recent poll found 41% of young people found the killing of Thompson on December the 4th as, quote, acceptable. Mangione's next court appearance for his New York state charges is set for February.
That was Mitch McCann reporting. In Europe, revised figures show that the UK economy flatlined in the third quarter. This came after legal services firms and bars and restaurants recorded a weaker-than-expected performance. Ray Anderson has more.
Christmas has not brought much cheer for the UK's struggling economy and its new government. An ONS report says there was no economic growth between July and September, immediately after the Labour government swept to power. It also revised down its growth reading for the second quarter of 2024 to 0.4% from a previous 0.5%. And to compound the bad news, the Bank of England has estimated zero growth in the fourth quarter. So what's to blame? Well, the ONS says the UK economy was held back by a fall in production output of 0.4%, largely caused by a fall in energy supply and a decrease in machinery and equipment manufacturing. Meanwhile, the UK's dominant services sector failed to grow in the third quarter, with the ONS revising down its previous estimate of 0.1% to 0%. It's the latest blow to a government that said it wanted the fastest economic growth in the G7, but whose tax-raising autumn budget to plug holes in public finances may have dented business confidence. The Confederation of British Industry has responded, saying the economy is, quote, headed for the worst of all worlds, with firms expecting to, quote, reduce both output and hiring amid price rises. The group blamed the recently announced rise in employer national insurance contributions, which they believe exacerbated a, quote, already tepid demand environment.
How worse can it get? It could fall into recession. Now, the good news is actually what you've seen is actually there are underlying elements in a slowing global economy. There are areas that are more positive, which don't get really picked up by a lot of the economic data. For instance, a lot of the technology areas. Britain, in terms of its financial structure, is going to have to try and restructure itself. It will do, but it's going to take time.
Today, the UK Chancellor accepted that she faced a huge challenge, but blamed 15 years of neglect by the previous Conservative government and insisted that she has laid the foundations for the long-term economic growth that Labour has pledged to deliver.
That was Ray Anderson reporting. Finally, in Africa, the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority is investigating the death of several animals, including 4 black rhinos, due to contamination in Lake Chivero, the primary water source for many cities in the country, including the capital. As Farai Makatuya reports, pollutants have flown into one of the tributaries of the lake.
There's a pungent smell here, and that's because what's flowing into the lake is raw sewage and effluent being pumped into the river from the city upstream. City authorities don't have enough money for the chemicals to treat the waste before it's discharged into the water, which has led to the current crisis.
You know, when raw sewage is being discharged into the lake, it creates a fertile ground for algae, which causes a lot of problems for fish in terms of oxygen. What we have done was to do the test to find out what was happening, and the test confirmed that it was cyanobacteria which was causing the deaths of these animals.
4 rhinos and wildebeest, 3 zebras and several bird species have died, and thousands of fish have washed up on the shore.
It's critical. It really is serious, because not only is the wildlife suffering, but also the people around the lake.
Hundreds of fishermen who rely on the lake have been grounded until a solution is found. Stafford, who's been warning about the rising pollution, hopes the current crisis will finally push authorities to act.
Because of the biotic in the water, you need a probiotics that we can put in. We can arrange that, and you can do that pretty quickly. And then also you need aeration system to oxygenate the water and turn it over. That is all possible very quickly. But, of course, we need the authorities that are generally paralyzed. They always wait until there's a crisis, and then they all look at each other and point fingers.
Authorities say the only permanent solution is to stop discharging raw sewage into the lake, which will require the city of Harare to be supported with the finances it needs to treat the waste.
That was Farai Makatuya reporting from Harare. Now, recapping today's headlines. Israeli and Palestinian officials say they're coming closer to a ceasefire deal, but crucial differences remain unresolved. The suspect accused of murdering UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson has pleaded not guilty to charges of terrorism and murder. The UK economy flatlined in the third quarter, with legal services firms and bars and restaurants recording a weaker than expected performance. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports, and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Tianyu. Thank you for listening.